Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's 11th of June, 2024. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So apologies for missing yesterday's episode, everyone. I know that a Monday rug fuel is always painful since I don't do episodes on weekends, but I'm back today and hopefully I won't miss any other episodes during this week, or at least I don't think I'm going to. But kicking off today, I've got some stuff I want to talk about with regards to Ethereum decentralization. I think that's an important conversation to always be having, but this tweet that I saw from the Ethereum on ARM account actually spurred a bunch of thoughts in me today that I wanted to talk about here, but I've got a bunch of stuff to get through, which I'll get to throughout the episode. So let's kick off with this decentralization discussion. So firstly, there was this tweet that the Ethereum on ARM Twitter account put out, and they started the tweet off by saying, from the very first day, we were promised that an Ethereum node could run on any consumer device. In 2024, you can run on a $200 ARM64 board using 10 watts. And they're doing this with one archive node and validator client and a super node, an L1 plus L2 on the same device. And there's some information in this thread about the actual specs of the hardware plus what the software, what clients they're actually running here. So they're running Reth and Prism with one of their validators. It was synced using a snapshot from Merkle. Took around 10 hours to sync. And the details of the board is that it's a Nano PC-T6 with 16 gig of RAM. The board price itself is $189. And then there is a 2 terabyte drive there. Obviously, that adds to the cost. It's not $200 for the whole thing. You have to factor in the SSD cost here, the 2 terabyte SSD drive, but that's the total cost there. I don't know what a 2 terabyte SSD drive is right now, what the cost is right now, but I don't think it's too much. So really, maybe $400, probably not even that much to basically have a fully synced Ethereum archive node along with an L2 node, as well as they said here, the super node they're running is Geth, Prism, and Optimism's OP Geth and OP node software here. Now, the reason I'm talking about this or bringing this up is because, one, this is really cool. You guys know that I run a bunch of my validators that are part of my retirement account on my Rock 5B board, my little Proteus device that I got from the Rocket Pool community. So I run my validators on that, and they're fine. They run just fine. It's a very low-powered device, a Rock 5B board, and it's been great. And it hasn't really given me any issues since I got it, basically. And of course, that's not always going to be the case. There's always going to be things that break with the hardware. But the fact that I can run these things on such low-powered hardware is the dream here. And I made a comment in the Daily Gwei Discord channel today on this topic where I said that the Ethereum ecosystem only gets more decentralized over time, while other ecosystems seem to get more centralized over time. And you can point to a bunch of different metrics and a bunch of different measures around what decentralization actually is. You guys know my opinion on this. I think decentralization is an emergent property of a bunch of other properties like credible neutrality, censorship resistance, how easy is it to run a node, what's the distribution of the actual asset look like, the asset that's securing the network, and so on and so forth, right? What's the distribution of the validators, the proof of stake validators look like, how many node operators there are, so on and so forth, right? So it's an emergent property, basically. But the problem is that decentralization obviously is extremely hard to achieve. A lot of chains aren't even trying to achieve it. And on top of that, a lot of chains won't even achieve it because there is a power law effect here in terms of how many people actually care. So you've got like the Bitcoiners, the Ethereans, and maybe a sprinkle of other groups out there that actually care about decentralization, that actually care about making sure that people can run nodes on consumer hardware, that the distribution of the asset is very fair. They care about having as many node operators on the network as possible. They don't think economic security is a meme, right? These kind of things here. And even within ecosystems like Bitcoin that are held up as the bastion of decentralization, I think that even with Bitcoin over time, it just becomes a lot more centralized because proof of work as a mechanism is very centralizing. I'm sure you guys have seen that a lot of miners, especially during bearish periods and bear markets, and especially after halvenings, tend to go bankrupt or tend to have to sell off a lot of assets or tend to have to basically consolidate with other miners in order to stay afloat. And this is because proof of work is extremely expensive to maintain. The margins are usually razor thin. So what happens is that economies of scale always win out. Now, obviously, that is not a good thing because it means that the number of large miners gets smaller and smaller over time, which the logical conclusion would be that there's probably just going to be 2 large mining operations left. And I'm not talking about the mining pools. I'm talking about the actual mining operations themselves. And yes, you could have like one mining operation in the US and one in Europe and one in China, but they could all be, or maybe not in China anymore, but you know what I'm saying, like on each kind of like continent or different countries around the world, but they could all be owned ultimately by the same parent company, the same parent entity, because they basically just acquired these other mining farms over time. And that consolidation has been happening for many years now and seems like it's going to keep happening into the future. That's just an inherent centralization vector of proof of work. Now, of course, proof of stake is not perfect. Proof of stake is centralizing as well. And it depends on what proof of stake you're looking at, because there is delegated proof of stake, or DPoS, which is extremely centralizing and lends itself to cartelization, or there is Ethereum proof of stake, which has centralization vectors of it. We've seen these things play out, like with Lido, for example, and also can lend itself to some cartelization too there. But in my opinion, I think Ethereum proof of stake is one of the least centralizing mechanisms that we have, for a lot of the reasons that I've outlined before. A big reason being that there's actually kind of a punishment for doing bad things in the form of slashing. Another reason is that we have a lot of economic security in that proof of stake mechanism there, because ETH's very valuable and there's a lot of ETH staked there. Another big one is that the distribution of node operators is very healthy on the Ethereum network, and we have a very healthy solo staker culture. We have a very healthy solo kind of full node culture there, and we allow people to run their own full nodes, as I just described here. So there is a kind of cultural element here that also fits in with the inherent economic elements. And I think that Ethereum is really best positioned to continue to get more decentralized over time, while every other ecosystem seems to get more centralized over time. And I'm not trying to pick on Bitcoin here. It is definitely far from the worst case of this. There are many other L1 chains out there that are really, really bad, really, really centralized, and they try to hide it, but it's pretty obvious that they're centralized. I don't want to name any names here, but then I do want to make a comment about L2s as well, because the Ethereum ecosystem doesn't just include the L1, it also includes the L2s, and obviously the vast majority of the L2s are quite centralized today, right? Whether that be via centralized sequences, whether that be via permissioned fraud proofs or permissioned proving generally, whether that be with multi-sigs. I think they pretty much all have multi-sigs or security councils and so on and so forth. So if you take that perspective there, Ethereum L1, if you want to split this up here, Ethereum L1 has definitely become a lot more decentralized over time, but because we're obviously scaling via L2s, that's just as critically important. So the next step and the next mission is to make sure that these L2s decentralize, and we're doing that through the various stages, stage 0, stage 1, and stage 2, as defined by Vitalik and tracked by L2Beat. I'm going to talk about Optimism, what they did today, going live with fraud proofs, because that's obviously one of the steps here, but that's my general thinking around all of this. And I could go into many different directions here. I mean, I only spoke about, I guess like scratch the surface on this. I didn't speak about, censorship resistance. I didn't speak about credible neutrality. I didn't speak about the distribution of the asset. But I guess like those things aren't as relevant as the actual underlying mechanism, whether that be proof of work or proof of stake. It's centralizing mechanisms, and also the fact that within Ethereum on L1 and L2, it's very, very, especially on L1, it's very, very easy to run a full node and verify the rules of the network for yourself. And that is the whole point. I've said this to you guys before, and I'll say it again. If you are not decentralized as a blockchain, then your blockchain serves absolutely no purpose. It is a vastly inferior database. It doesn't make any sense that it exists. It doesn't really exist for any other reason than seemingly to enrich token holders, in my opinion. I just don't think that having a semi-decentralized or a pretty obviously centralized blockchain helps anyone, especially if it stays like that. Obviously, as I said, the L2s are quite centralized today, but they do plan to decentralize over time and have a very clear path to getting there, as defined by the stages that I've mentioned on the Refuel countless times before. But these L1s, they don't have paths to get there because they become more centralized over time due to inherent mechanisms. They are very, very different to an L2 when it comes to decentralizing. And it's much harder because you have to basically first and foremost make it so that anyone can easily run the chain, and anyone can get involved with validating the transactions on the chain, whether that be in proof of work or proof of stake. It doesn't matter, and ensure that that doesn't become more centralized over time, which is the hardest part of it, because economies of scale play out in both proof of work and proof of stake, and there are very few ways to actually dissuade that from happening, and very few ways to stop that from happening. But I think within Ethereum we have a culture, at least, of that. So from that culture spawns a lot of different ideas, technical, economic, what have you, that can combat this, which is Ethereum's superpower. At the end of the day, our social layer is our superpower here. But you can go read Ethereum on ARM's Twitter thread for yourself to get more details about their setup here. I just thought it was a great tweet to give me a platform to talk about these things, which I consider to be critically important. Because as I just said, if you don't have decentralization as an L1, you may as well not exist. It does not make any sense for you to exist. It does not make any. You're not really solving any issues or any problems. You're not bringing value to the world. At least that's my pretty strongly held belief. I would say out of all of my beliefs in crypto, that is pretty much like one of the strongest, if not the strongest that I have. That would be very, very hard to kind of change my mind on. I don't think you could change my mind on that. I'm generally try to be open-minded, but when it comes to the fundamental reasons of why this ecosystem even exists in the first place, you'd be very hard-pressed to try and change my opinion on that, because that would mean that I essentially gave up or give up on this ecosystem, and I essentially think this ecosystem has no value if I thought that there was value in a centralized chain, because at the end of the day, it's an oxymoron. A centralized chain is a database, an SQL database. It is not a blockchain, at least in my opinion. All right, so Rockerpool has published a new blog post on their Medium here, as shared by Superfears, because I think that Rockerpool's Twitter account is still hacked, or they still haven't gotten it back, I believe. Yeah, it doesn't seem like they've gotten it back, or they haven't posted on here. But anyway, this is the Houston protocol upgrade. So as you guys know, there are two big upgrades coming to Rockerpool over the next, I guess, like, very shortly for Houston, but in the future Saturn as well. But they've been worked on for the bulk of like a 12 to 18 month period by the time they both go live here. So Houston, that's been in development for the last 9 months, will be going live in just a week on the 17th of June. Now, if you want to read about everything that is included in this upgrade, you can go check this out, this blog post that I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But as I've said before about Rockerpool and how they've got these major upgrades coming, I think the goal, obviously, is to make it easier to stake with Rockerpool and to remove that RPL staking requirement here. Now, I don't know if that is part of this. I haven't really seen it as part of the blog post here. I think that's going to be part of this Saturn upgrade. I don't think it's going to be part of this upgrade here. But there are a lot of exciting features to look at, as you can see here. You know, they're doing a lot of stuff around layer 2 scaling. You can stake ETH on behalf of a node. So basically, this upgrade allows an account to stake ETH on behalf of a Rockerpool node that is registered in the protocol. This supports a variety of situations where the node operator is not directly providing the ETH. So it's enhanced security for node operators, as they can stake directly from their hardware wallet. So that's really great. Staking as a service providers, where custody of funds is managed by a trusted custodian. So now they can get involved with Rockerpool. Protocol integrations, where custody of funds are managed by smart contracts. And DAOs or organizations where custody of funds are managed by a treasury. So essentially opening up the Rockerpool node operator side of things to a wider audience here, which is really great to see there. But you can go check out this blog post. I'll link it in the YouTube description before. And, you know, it's funny because I was just talking about Ethereum's superpower being decentralization, and specifically around how Ethereum Proof of Stake does a really great job of distributing out the validator set and keeping things decentralized there, even within the things like Lido, because, you know, Lido is obviously still quite big. It's, 29% of market share right now. But as I've described before, Lido is not a monolithic single entity that stakes all the ETH as part of one Lido node operator, right? Lido has 36 node operators, I believe, from memory here, that stake a portion, a percentage of all of that ETH there, and those node operators are mostly independent. They're mostly outside of the US, and they obviously are beholden to the Lido DAO to some extent, but they're not directly controlled by the Lido DAO. The Lido DAO could not force, by a technical means, the Lido node operators to do something malicious, for example. The node operators would have to basically collude. And the way I view Lido actually is basically we have a mini delegated proof of stake within Lido, within Ethereum's proof of stake. But then outside of that, we have Rockerpool, we have other staking protocols like EtherFi, Puffer, Swell, Renzo, there's a few others out there. We have the centralized exchanges, Binance and Coinbase and so on and so forth. But we generally have a very healthy Ethereum staking ecosystem. But obviously when it comes to ranking these things, and when it comes to wanting, what you want to actually see grow and which ones you actually want to see get traction, you want to see the more decentralized ones get traction. And that's exactly what I want to see with Rockerpool. I've been a supporter of Rockerpool for a very long time now, and I want to see more node operators coming online with Rockerpool. I want to see Rockerpool's market share continue to go up. I think it's come down a bit because they've had issues with being able to scale up Rockerpool for a bunch of different reasons. A major reason being that people don't necessarily want to buy RPL and have to stake that. And there are issues around that they're fixing in this Houston upgrade where certain entities were just locked out of staking their ETH as part of the Rocket Pool kind of ecosystem here because they were behind, smart contracts, or there were DAOs and stuff like that. So just opening up the Rocket Pool protocol to more and more entities and individuals and what have you is very, very positive for the protocol here. So, as long as Rocket Pool remains decentralized, I will remain bullish on it. I think that, I'm not bearish on things that are centralized, but I'm mostly bullish on things that are decentralized, especially when it's such a critical part of the Ethereum ecosystem or the Ethereum protocol in the actual kind of proof of stake mechanism that runs the whole chain. Because at the end of the day, the entire chain relies on a safe and secure and reliable proof of stake Ethereum. And that's what we're doing, and that's what we're giving them with things like Rocket Pool, because Rocket Pool is a decentralized provider. There are thousands of node operators, and anyone can become a Rocket Pool node operator if they so wish here, which is obviously really awesome. But you can go give this a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so just to round out the protocol-related news, I've been spending a lot more time studying these two things lately, which I basically told you guys to continue studying or to start studying, I think a few months ago. So these two things are based rollups and pre-confirmations. And as I said in my tweet, I believe these things, when implemented widely across the ecosystem, will be the next huge unlock for Ethereum. So the reason I say this is because if we look out 5 to 10 years of what the end game is for the rollup centric roadmap, and maybe it takes a little bit longer than this, but I think 5 to 10 years is a pretty safe estimate here. And we look at the problems that exist today within the L2 ecosystem, within the rollup ecosystem, it really falls into one big bucket, I think, of fragmentation, right? Of liquidity fragmentation, ecosystem fragmentation, not being able to do cross-chain transactions in an atomic way, those sorts of things. I think that those issues generally are overblown. I don't think they're like death knell issues or critical issues that need to get solved or no one's ever going to use L2s. We obviously know that that's not true. People will gladly use these L2s even though they're fragmented because they're getting value out of it. But if we look at the end game and look at what the least friction places are to get to, they involve based rollups and pre-confirmations for two different but related reasons here. So as you guys know, as I've explained before, based rollups basically take advantage of the existing L1 Ethereum validator set and do the transaction processing for the L2s and for the rollups basically on L1, right? And that can, not in all instances, but in a lot of instances, enable that kind of cross-chain communication between the L2s and even L2 and L1 there. But there are a bunch of different things that go into that I'm not going to dive into now. But then there's pre-confirmations, which essentially with pre-confirmations, what we're trying to do, this is less about interoperability and more about transaction inclusion. So essentially, an issue exists today where if you have a really cheap chain, and it's so cheap that it's just costs nothing to spam the chain, and this happens on Solana a lot. Essentially, what happens is that you don't have guaranteed inclusion. It doesn't matter how high of a fee you pay, your inclusion is either delayed or you have to keep spamming the chain in order to get your transaction included. Now, this is obviously not a great user experience. This is obviously not something that we should be settling for, and this can happen at L2 as well. It's not exclusive to L1s. It's not exclusive to Solana. So one way of fixing this is doing pre-confirmations, where essentially, from my understanding, I might be getting some stuff wrong here. Essentially, you can confirm something confirm a transaction within 100 milliseconds, but as a pre-confirmation, which essentially is a crypto economic guarantee that basically says, okay, well, we're going to attest, not literally attest, but just for sake of argument, we're going to attest that, this transaction is valid. We're going to pre-confirm it, and then we're going to confirm it within, if it's a based rollup, within the 12-second period of Ethereum L1 blocks. If it's an L2 that has 1 second block times, we're going to wait 1 second for it to confirm here. But the reason why we're doing pre-confirmations is we're trying to have better inclusion. We're trying to have better user experience, better, faster transactions here. And then that basically allows for, I don't know if I'd say guaranteed inclusion, but high chance of inclusion. Depending on the fee that you pay as well here, depending on the L2s, a bunch of different stuff that goes into this. And the way this plays really nicely with based rollups is that the main limitation of based rollups is that if you're doing the transactions at L1, you have to wait for an L1 Ethereum block, which is up to 12 seconds. Now, that is a really poor user experience. It basically means that if you wanted to do a transaction and there wasn't pre-confirmations in place, and you wanted to do a base transaction, you would have to wait up to 12 seconds. And that is something that L2 users are just not going to settle for because they're used to, 1 to 2 second max transaction times. And that is what we should be settling for. Like there should not be a world where transactions take longer than 2 seconds to confirm. Ideally, it's 1 second or less, but 2 seconds is okay still as well. The way I like to compare it is to websites loading. It shouldn't take more than a couple seconds for websites to load, or else people are going to get frustrated and click off. That's the world we kind of live in today. And that's the world that I think users expect from on-chain products here. So pre-confirmations comes in and basically says, okay, well, we can pre-confirm this in 100 milliseconds, tell the user that their transaction, transaction process just fine, and it's all well and good. They can go do whatever they want from there, but then the actual transaction doesn't get included in a block until the block is proposed on L1 here. So we've basically been able to solve that issue that based rollups had of slower inclusion than you would get with just an L2 sequencer, for example, like the normal L2 sequencer that we're used to here. So that's why I said these are huge unlocks for the Ethereum ecosystem, because not only do you get all of the, I guess, nice properties of using the L1 as a transaction processor, or the L1 validator set as processing transactions here, things like censorship resistance, things like interoperability, atomic composability, liquidity interoperability as well, not just transaction interoperability, but you're also getting that without having to wait for those, up to 12 seconds, because we got away from that. So there's no point going back to that with base rollups just to get those other properties, because users are going to get annoyed because the user experience will degrade here. So that's why pre-confirmations are so important, and that's why you should be paying attention to these two things. So you can just Google them. I don't have any resources on hand, because the way I research these things is I usually just Google them and I go to the relevant kind of links, especially when it comes to ETH research. Stuff on there is very high quality. There are blog posts from certain people that I read. Justin Drake's talked a lot about these already. I'm pretty sure he's done a few podcasts with Bankless about this and others. So there's a lot of content out there today, and there are a lot of projects to follow as well. Justin Drake, I think I mentioned this the other day, tweeted out a graphic with a bunch of those projects on there. So if you just go there and read all that stuff, that's generally what I do. You kind of get a feel and a learning about how this all works, but you also get to look at it from different perspectives, because every project has their own way of doing things, and it allows you to essentially form your own opinion on this without someone else dictating it to you. So yeah, those are two things that I'd be paying attention to if I were you. All right. Speaking of layer 2s, moving on to, I guess, what is probably the biggest announcement over the last 24 hours is that the zkSync token is finally here. I believe this is one of the longest awaited tokens in history. Like, I don't know the exact kind of days that people have been waiting and farming this token for, but it has been a very, very long time. And just a disclaimer here, I am an investor in the Matter Labs, which builds zkSync. So I just wanted to put that out there. And in terms of eligibility, I think I was only eligible on my public sassel.eth address, because as you guys know, any projects that I'm invested in or advising, I do not farm. I do not try to maximize airdrop allocation. So I basically got I think it was 13,000 or something. I mean, you can check sassel.eth for yourself. 13,000 ZK tokens, whatever that's going to be worth when the token goes live for trading. Who knows? But you can check your own tokens, or check your own addresses. Sorry, for which for the amount of tokens that you've gotten at claim.zknation.io. Please go to that link and that link only. Do not go to any other links, because obviously they could be phishing or scamming. And there's also an accompanying blog post discussing what the ZK token is, what the distribution looks like, and so on and so forth. What I do want to focus on for a little bit here is maybe two things. First thing is the distribution. Second thing is the airdrop itself and airdrops generally. So the token distribution looks quite good. And in terms of the airdrop itself, the airdrop is 17.5% of all the tokens. That is a huge airdrop. And this is not a staged airdrop. It's a one-time airdrop that's going live in 7 days from today. And that is one of the biggest, if not the biggest airdrops out of any of the major projects that I've seen here. And in terms of insider allocation, investors and team, it's only 33.3%. So that is quite low. And they're giving almost 30% to the token assembly and almost 20% to ecosystem initiatives, which is around 50%, but that's all community as well there. So the community got a total of 66.7% allocation, with team investors at 33.3%. I think this is a really good distribution. I would say that this is one of the best, if not the best, that I've seen in recent memory for a big project. Not just because the airdrop is big, but just because it's not just like a 50-50 split between community and insiders, right? Or even a 55-45 split. It is a 66-33 split effectively here, or a 67-33 split here, which is really different to what we're used to. Now, what does this mean? Like, what does this mean generally for zkSync as a project? What does this mean for the ecosystem? Well, for the ecosystem, I hope it means that more and more projects follow this lead. I hope it means that we're gone of the days of like 50-50 split. I think that's still too much to the team and investors. That's a huge allocation to them. If you're trying to build something decentralized, I don't know how you can do that with a 50-50 split, right? Where the team and investors own so much of the supply. And also it's also worth remembering that usually the team and investors are a few hundred people or something like that, a few hundred individuals, if that, compared to the community, which is tens of thousands of token holders, right? So when you think about it like that, you can see where the balance of power will lie, where essentially these individuals have huge amounts of tokens because they're the team or the investors, and in a DAO like situation, they can sway the vote. And we've seen them do this, right? The VCs, the investors generally here. So from that perspective, I hope more and more teams are able to do token distributions like this and even better than this. And when it comes to the airdrop itself, I gave a bit more thoughts about this on the episode that I recorded with Eric, which I'll talk about in a sec. We actually did record the episode. But my general thoughts on airdrops is that it's become such a convoluted game now that I think that there is no way to win for projects because, as I said, this is one of the biggest airdrops in recent memory, 17.5% of the community. But I go on Twitter or I go on Discord and I see the comments being made and it's so much complaining. It's people saying, oh, the maximum amount is too much. The 100,000 maximum ZK tokens is too much. Oh, I didn't get enough. Oh, look at you rewarding all the cybles and so on and so forth. And then I look at that and I go back to what I said maybe a few months ago on the Refuel, where essentially these cybles are not only running cybles on chain, where it actually recently came out that one address or one entity was responsible for 65,000 addresses that were farming the layer 0 token. Right. So not only do you have that one entity, whether it's one person or a group of people, doesn't matter. One entity that has 65,000 addresses. What do you think that these people are doing with social media? They're creating bot accounts or buying bot networks, and they're using that to steer sentiment for projects. Now, what usually happens is that if they don't get their tokens that they were expecting to get from a project, they will basically make sure that that project has really bad PR for a few days, and then the project will be forced into giving them a better allocation, forced into rewarding the cybles. And because this keeps happening over and over again, essentially what you have is a game of, if you don't do it, you're damned, because essentially if you don't do it, you're just going to get spammed to death by these bots. And then if you do it, you're also damned, because it means that everyone's going to be upset with you for rewarding the cybles. And there's no winning here. So the only winning move is not to play if you really want to win, or you just do it and hope for the best. But so many of these airdrops over the past year, especially, maybe even the last 6 months, have not resulted in, I think, what the team wanted it to result in, which is a healthy distribution, a healthy community, kind of allocation, a healthy way for the community to get involved with the ecosystem, and good marketing and PR for the project. It's done the opposite in a lot of cases. So I'm very bearish just airdrops generally at this point. I think that we should actually do away with airdrops and go back to ICOs. I think I said this maybe a month ago or 2 months ago on the Refuel, where I said that ICOs were just a better model. Sell a bunch of the tokens to the public, right? Then they're all circulating. There's no need to filter for cybles because, yeah, okay, people can cyble the ICO, whatever, but there's a cost to that. There's a big cost to that, where essentially they have to buy the tokens from the open market. And you could do some reverse Dutch auction mechanism so that, it's very hard to game, so on and so forth. But it's so much better than doing an airdrop and then having to play this entire game that goes into an airdrop and having your project be farmed and fake metrics for like years potentially. So when it comes to just airdrops generally, that's my kind of view on it. And as I said, I spoke more about this with the podcast I did with Eric, which you can listen to there. But generally, as I said, there are positives here. The big positive is the fact that the distribution is really nice. I think the negative is that it's just another airdrop, right? I think that it's just another airdrop that's just going to be, some people are going to be happy. A lot of people are going to be sad. There's going to be a lot of bots mudding the waters. It's just not going to be very good, generally on social media about this, right? And I'm actually curious to see if the zkSync team changes any of this due to feedback, because you don't even know if that feedback's coming from humans. It could just be coming from the bots. Especially in the world of AI now, where it's very easy to create a bot network that looks human to the casual observer. I'm sure a lot of you see comments on Twitter and you probably think they're human, just like I do, but they're probably most likely not human. They're just bots or AI bots, and it's not a good time for anyone there. But you can go give this kind of thing a read for yourself, this blog post to read for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. The eligibility criteria is pretty vast, actually, which was cool as well. It's another +1 for zkSync here. You can see here it's just some standard eligibility, basically interacting with the protocol, but also things like donated to a Gitcoin round, hold a certain NFT, and transacted on, obviously zkSync era mainnet and things like that. And there are a bunch of multipliers too. So you can go give that a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But it's finally released. The details are finally out there. As I said, it doesn't go live for claiming until a week from today, which means there's no trading right now. There is a, pre-market. It puts the token price, last time I checked, at 30 cents. So if it's a 21 billion token supply, then at 30 cents, the fully diluted value is what? Like 8 billion or something, if I'm doing my math correctly. So if you got, 10, 20,000 tokens, then it's a pretty healthy airdrop at 30 cents, right? And I think a lot of people actually got that, 10 or 20,000 or even more tokens. If you got, I think the maximum was like 100,000 or around 100,000. If you got 100,000, that's 30 grand, guys. That's a huge airdrop. So as I said, the airdrop itself is very, very big. It went to over 600,000 addresses or wallets. But in terms of the fairness of the airdrop, that's up to the, Twitter sphere or the social sphere to work out there. But you can go check out this blog post for yourself. I'll link it in the YouTube description below for you to do so. All right, so it's finally here after, I think this has been, 2 years or something, or 3 years of optimism promising this. So fault proofs are finally live on the OP stack here. So you can see here that these fault proofs are not only live, but they're also permissionless. So the OP stack has now arrived at stage 1 decentralization. And as they describe here, permissionless fault proofs allow anyone to withdraw ETH and ERC20 tokens from an OP stack chain to L1 without the need to involve a trusted third party. That's that escape hatch that I've talked about before. That's one of the keys to actually being a decentralized rollup, and the OP stack chains, the ones that have integrated this, will have that, which is awesome. And you can contribute to superchain security themselves by challenging invalid withdrawals, so anyone can do this. And so while participation in the fault-proof system is permissionless, as part of a safe and responsible rollout, the Security Council retains the power to revert to a permission state in the event of a system failure, which is obviously those multi-sigs that I've spoken about there. But just a huge kudos to Optimism for finally getting this out there. Obviously, a little bit late to the party, considering that Arbitrum has had permissionless fraud proofs for quite a while. And I guess fraud proofs are exclusive to optimistic rollups, and the only two major optimistic rollup ecosystems are Arbitrum and Optimism. But you can see here that Arbitrum is stage 1, OP mainnet is in review right now, but I'm expecting relatively soon for base, OP mainnet, Blast, and I'm just going down the list here, and mode, these top 10 OP stack chains here, to be stage 1 relatively soon. And as we know, Arbitrum is trying to reach stage 2 this year or maybe early next year. So we're getting there, guys. The rollups are decentralizing. They're getting to the stage that we want them to get to, and they're not just staying put. And I just think it's a huge milestone for all of the L2 ecosystem that Optimism has done this, because as I said, Optimism is one of the major L2 ecosystems, and them doing this is really great for overall kind of, morale for the path towards decentralization and for people believing in this. But also it's a signal to other L2 teams to say, hey, you got to be serious about decentralization. Yes, it can take a while. Yes, it's a lot of work, but you have to be serious about it. If you're not, then just get out of the way, sort of thing. Get out of this game, because you're not playing the game that you should be playing there. But yeah, once again, huge kudos to Optimism for this. Can't wait to see for these things to be live across all of the OP stack chains that Optimism supports here. All right, last up, I did mention before that Eric and I finally recorded that episode that we'd been teasing for a few weeks on Twitter. So this is the first Into the Ether podcast recording in 2 years for us. So it won't be on the Daily Gwei. It's going to be on the Into the Ether podcast. If you subscribe to the podcast back in the day on your RSS feed, it's on the same feed. So you'll get the episode once it comes out. But if you haven't subscribed yet, all the links are in this tweet, which I'll link in the YouTube description below for you to go check out there. And you can follow the Into the Ether podcast Twitter account, which was actually the old ETHUB Twitter account. So if you're following ETHUB, you're already following it there. But we had a really great discussion, honestly, guys. Like, it is like a drive-through episode that we've done before on the Daily Gwei, but it is more in depth than that, and it is more broad, because on the drive-through episodes, we usually would touch on maybe 1 or 2 topics, but in this one, we touched on a lot of different things, and we plan to do these weekly going forward. There's no video, it's just audio right now. We might do video in the future, but I thought it was a really great episode. Eric has a lot of great insights. He's definitely getting more and more involved in the ecosystem again after being away for a little while, because he had his daughter that he wanted to look after, which is actually a pretty good reason to take a break from this industry, honestly. Like, it's the best reason to take a break. Maybe when I have kids at some point, I'll probably take a longer break than what I did recently. But yeah, he's definitely gotten a lot more into it, which makes it even more fun for me, because it means that we have a lot of things to talk about, a lot of different ways to bounce ideas off each other, and it's just what made for a really great episode. So that's going live within the next 24 hours or even the next 12 hours, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, obviously, or to the refuel, obviously. But yeah, let me know how you guys like it in the Daily Gwei Discord channel. If you like it, if you hate it, let me know. As I said, we plan to continue doing that every week. Daily Gwei is not going anywhere, of course. It's just, I mean, the refuel is still going to be happening. Hopefully not too many rug fuels generally, but you know, there's always a surprise rug fuel. That's just the way I roll on the Daily Gwei these days. But yeah, anyway, on that note, I think that's going to be it for today. So thank everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.